arrived late, but anyway, everybody, welcome. I'm really pleased you're here. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce you to Andrea McGill O'Rourke and Kathy Carabello, who have just completed the grueling New England 67, hiking the 67 tallest peaks in the Northeast. And it's quite an accomplishment. I did the math today on it, guys. If you assume 20,000 steps per hike, which is about, I think average, you guys hiked 1.4 million steps doing this. And that's just in the last 4 or 5 years. So holy moly, a lot of steps. And that kind of explains why you told me yesterday that you're big fans of Advil. And we'll talk about your preparation for that as well. But really awesome accomplishment. And we'll just dig right in. For those of you who don't know me, and I see a lot of people on here that I have not met, so let me just introduce myself briefly. My name is Martin Pazzani. I'm a career hiker and mountaineer. I've been on all 7 continents, and a couple of years ago, I wrote a book pretty much about hiking, but it's more about anti-aging, and it's called The Secrets of Aging Well, Get Outside. And during the course of research for that book, I went through a lot of science, but I also wanted to interview hikers, especially older hikers, people above 50. So I put out an APB for people above 50. I wound up getting hundreds and hundreds of people responding. And I interviewed about 100 for the book. And it not only validated what I believed myself, but it was just so fantastic to meet a group of people. And so most of their stories are actually in the book. Andrea and Kathy in particular, as you can see, they're featured top left here as they finish their 48. And I think, Kathy, that's you down at the bottom right as well. The messaging was just so amazingly consistent. I've never really met a group of people more motivated, more fit, more forward-thinking, more positive about the world than this group of very experienced hikers. And it really compelled me to finish the book. And of all the stories in the book, one of the more compelling was Kathy and Andrea and how they met, which is why we decided to do this webinar now that they've finished the New England, the Northeast 67. Is it New England or Northeast? I interchange it. Which is it really? It's
England.
It's New England. Yeah. Thank you. So let's dig right in. It's a phenomenal accomplishment. And the story begins with this really wonderful picture, Kathy, that your father painted in 1988. And I'll let you take it from there, how you guys met.
So my dad was a painter, and he used photography as his medium. He loved nature, and he was just enamored with Mount Monadnock, and he loved this scene, this barn that stood alone in a field with Mount Monadnock behind it, and it's just up the road from us, a few houses up the road. And for years it sat alone in the field with the mountain there. And my dad was just so in love with this scene that he photographed it. And then from there, he did a sketch. And so he did a painting, and the painting has been hanging for 30 plus years in my dining room. And about 6 years ago, we noticed that somebody had purchased the property and they were renovating that old barn into a house, which was a very interesting thing to watch that whole process. So we had no idea who these people were, but we kept an eye on the progress, and we were so intrigued with how it was happening. And then my sister-in-law happened to find the original sketch to this painting and with some paperwork. And she said, you have the original painting, you should have this sketch. So I said, this is perfect, because I'm going to have this sketch mounted. I'll mount it, and that will be a gift to whoever's moving into the house. So one day after school, I stopped at the post office, and I happened to see the red Mini Cooper that I had been seeing at the house, and tapped on the window and said, "You the one that just renovated the barn up the road? And she said, yes. And so that's kind of how it began. We set up a date and I brought the painting or the sketch of the painting over, got a tour of the house, which was amazing. Very historically correct. You know, they kept so many things in place, and yet, you know, so it still has its same outer features, but it became a beautiful home. So over a glass of wine and a lot of stories, we realized how much we had in common. And part of the commonality was that we just by chance both happened to like hiking. And Andrea, being new to the area, she wanted a way to get more familiar with the territory. So we started out by just doing some neighborhood hikes, then expanded to other mountains in southern New Hampshire. And then we decided to really challenge ourselves with a winter hike up Mount Monadnock. And that was a story in itself.
Well, that I think it's a story worth telling because it's so many times when you start out with higher goals, you're not completely sure of not only how hard it is, but how to prepare for it. So you just go ahead and do it, and you learn from the failure. And I know you told me that it was not the best experience your first time up.
So I'm going to jump in on that one
Oh.
because I feel like I was sort of the impetus to make an attempt and not to be successful. So for folks that are familiar with Monadnock, there is the gate trails. And so there's the Ranger, and White Cross and White Dot tend to be the trails that most people take when they come into the park. But we decided that we would take an alternate trail, the Dublin Trail. And so we started up the trail, and at the bottom, it was fine, no problem. We had on micro spikes, and we continued plodding up and up. And then we ran into a little ice, but we said, okay, we're gonna keep going. We're doing okay. And then we got into a little bit more ice, and things began to get very dicey. And I slipped and had quite a fall. And I said, okay, I'm going to try one more. And if I can't do that, I'm going to stop. And so I made one more attempt a little bit further with my micro spikes. And then I said, that's it. I'm done. I know my limitations. I'm going to go down. But then I looked down and I didn't know what to do. And as many times, one of the expressions we often use is a trail angel appeared. In this case, it was three. And it was three guys that were hiking. They were more experienced. They were better equipped. Instead of micro spikes, they had hill sounds, which are a little bit more aggressive traction, which we didn't have yet at that point. And I was really scared. And I said, I'm out of my comfort zone. I don't really know how to get down. And one of the guys said, look, I'm going to help you, but you need to listen to me. And one of the things he said was, you need to assume a pooper stance. And I said, wow, what's that? And he said, you need to get down, have a low center of gravity, and assume like you're going to take a poop. And so I said, look, I'm going to do anything to get down this mountain. So I did. And he kind of held my hand a little bit on some of the more difficult parts. Long story short, there are always people who come along to help us that have more experience than us. And it helped me get down the mountain and gain the confidence that I needed. The end of that story is 2 weeks later, better conditions, better traction, different trail. We did summit in winter, and we were really proud of ourselves. But a lesson learned, you need to know your limitations, and you need to turn back when it's getting too dicey. And I did that.
That's a really great lesson to learn, Andrea. You know, I've found with, especially with new hikers, sometimes they push too far, and you know, it's easy to go up. I don't think most people realize when they're starting out that down is harder, and because it's aerobically easier, but you know, the adage in climbing is it's hard to fall up, you fall down. And when you're going, it's much easier to lose your balance. It's much easier to take a serious fall because the ground is further away when you're going downhill. So you have to be cautious. And you probably had a good sense of that equation in your head and just knew you were getting yourself in too deep, which a lot of people don't do. And I think it's really sound thinking to know your limitations. Also with equipment too. So you know, and that lesson just translates just beyond your traction device. You know, you just have to know what kind of clothing to wear. Sometimes you can be underprepared. So preparation is most of this. And you know, for those of you who are listening who don't know Mount Monadnock the way we do in the Northeast, I believe it's the most frequently climbed mountain in the world. It's just because it's accessible. It's less than 2 hours from Boston. It's 2 hours from me here in Connecticut. It's 2 hours from everywhere in New England. And it's the only mountain in southern New Hampshire that kind of stands alone. So it's just so visible. And it's a great mountain. It really is, truly. So many great trails, and the views are spectacular. So what a great place to start. And really, I'm very envious that you guys live in the shadow of it for all those years. It's really kind of cool.
And it really was our training ground. We did Monadnock in between a lot of our hikes just to keep in practice. And the granite on Monadnock sometimes is harder than some of what we encountered in the White Mountains.
I would agree. There's so many great sections there. It is a really good mountain for training for much bigger peaks, which leads us actually to the next thing I want to talk about. I'm intrigued that then you got yourselves to Mount Pierce, and this is where the adventure began. And a little bit about Mount Pierce. It's in the Presidential Range. It's considered one of the first mountains you should do when you start the 48. It's easy to get to, but it's a great challenge, and it's got spectacular views. So I'd love to hear about the journey from Monadnock to the next level up onto Mount Pierce.
Yeah, well, there was one mountain that we did in the Whites prior to Mount Pierce, and that was Mount Willard.
Yeah.
And it's not a 4,000 footer, but it was a beautiful snowshoe hike. We did it in the winter, and Andrea kept saying, what's the big deal with this? This isn't very hard. It's, you know, it's just straight up woods. What's the big deal? And I said, just wait, because I had done it before and I knew that she needed a wow to really pull her in. So Mount Willard, when you come out of the woods, you all of a sudden you're woods, and then whoop, there's this enormous view. Just enormous. And, you know, you see the mountains behind us on Mount Pierce here, but Willard, it was really jaw-dropping. It was just so spectacular with all the beautiful white snow. And we were so wowed. And Andrea said, I want more of this. So we began this journey. We didn't set out and say, you know, we're going to do the 48 New Hampshire peaks. We had no idea. We really didn't. We just were so drawn to the views, and we were all about the challenge too. It was very just inspiring experience to be able to hike a mountain like that, have the reward of views like that, and say, wow, you know, let's do more. And so that's how Pierce happened. We said, you know, let's do a 4,000 footer and see what happens. And it was a test really of our ability to see, you know, were we going to be exhausted? We had no idea. We just set out thinking, well, let's give this a whirl and see what happens. And we started, that was in April of 2017.
Yep.
So you can see it looks wintry still up. You can see Mount Washington in the background. So the conditions were kind of in between. We had, at the base, it was, probably somewhat dry at that point, but going up, it was really a monorail. And we did the whole thing in microspikes, and we got to the top of Mount Pierce, and it wasn't a blue sky, beautiful bluebird day. It was pretty cloudy, but not so cloudy that we couldn't see the enormity of the views that we gained from being up that many more feet than Willard. And we sat up there and we ate our peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it started to sleet, and it didn't even matter. We were so happy with ourselves that we got up there, and we at that point, we named these views that we were in the playground of the gods.
Perfect.
And every time thereafter that we found ourselves up in the heavens like this, it was, here we are again, we're in the playground of the gods. And it was pretty spectacular. And we sat there and looked at each other and said, so this was number one. Is this going to be a thing? Should we go for it? And we had a whole discussion all the way down and the whole 3-hour drive back to New Hampshire. And we said, you know what? Let's do this. And we did.
Incredible. And it's great that you found each other with similar goals and motivations. It's really fantastic. And
It really,
and also
really
it's a good
was.
thing,
It was amazing.
you turn that negative experience on Monadnock, it's not really negative, it was a learning experience, into two big successes. And seriously, there is no better way to get hooked on this than Willard, I think, because I've also had that same experience. It's kind of like a little green tunnel as you're walking up to the edge. And then all of a sudden, it's one of the biggest bangs for the buck you can get in the White Mountains, because all of a sudden you got this view of everything, including the highway, including the parking lot where you were, which is great. So it's a great way to get totally hooked on it. And what a great experience there. I do want to talk about the whole journey, because just for those of you who are looking at these two pictures, what we've got on the left here, this is their finish on the 48. And that is one of my favorite places there. You finished on Bond Cliff, which to me, that's the most beautiful spot in the White Mountains. I think that is, for me, phenomenal.
Definitely
And
was.
We'll get
That was
to
our favorite of the whites.
Yeah, me too. And then we'll get to Katahdin, because I want people to hear your story about Katahdin, because you finished the most spectacular one, maybe for the end, and you did say it was quite a trek. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about training. Besides hiking, what did you guys do to prepare? Did you go to the gym? Did you run? What else did you work on?
I'll talk a little bit about what I did. So one of the things that I think is really important is do your research beforehand. So we did Mount Pierce. I went online. I Googled what are the easiest 48, 4,000 footers. So I got my list. And so, what are some good ones to start on to gain that confidence to build to more difficult ones? That was really helpful, because then Kathy and I had the conversation. Well, okay, so let's do Willie Field and the other one. I can't remember the name of it, the three that you do together. So
Willie and Field.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. So we did our research. We really were careful. And we also did our research on trails, because one of the things for me is I'm afraid of heights. And so I didn't want to go on trails where there was kind of like the knife's edge on Katahdin. I guess that's the best example I can use, where you really are looking to the right and looking to the left, and there's this narrow path and you fall into the abyss. And so I wanted trails that I could go up a mountain and feel pretty safe. Not that I always had that, but at least I wanted to sort of minimize that exposure, if you will. So do your research, read as much as you can. I began joining Facebook hiking pages. I wanted to read about other people's experience. What did they find? And I found those very, very helpful. They gave great tips, learned a lot from people. And in the other pieces, you need to be present on the trail. And there are so many people that come along that just share their experience with you to take or leave. And we listened. We listened to other people and what their experiences were. And I would say 90% of that information was just so helpful to us. So read, listen, do as much research, prep work as you can prior to your hike. It really helps immensely.
I want to jump in there too, just to say that not only listen, but don't be afraid to ask questions of these people who are out there who, they've had the experience doing these trails. They know what it's like. Some of them, we got feedback about what the trail conditions were like because some people had done it recently, and a lot of great advice and wisdom came from asking. So that was a really good tip for us.
Those are
And
such
I think
great
those
points.
those trail reports you just mentioned, Kathy, and even we got to the point of looking at water levels, like the day
Oh,
before a hike.
definitely.
What are the water levels? Because we had, a number of hikes, we had pretty serious water crossings. And we wanted to be as safe as possible. The other question you asked is, what did we do to prep? And early on, I was going to a gym and working out with weights and aerobics and an over 55 group of women, and kind of a stay young, stay healthy. So I did that, and we walked a lot. But then COVID happened, and I really changed up my routine. There was no more gym anymore, so I stopped that, and I just strictly walked outside and hiked. And I really never looked back. I'm not going to do the gym thing anymore. I'm just going to continue with nature and being outside.
I want
Interesting.
to jump in there too, because Andrea, remember back in the early days of our hikes, both of us were members of the same gym, and Andrea, did her thing there, but I did some other things there. And we did that, 2 or 3 times a week. But then there really wasn't a lot else that we were doing in between our hikes. So
No.
we'd do the hikes on the weekends, and a lot of times we were feeling like, oh boy, we're not in good shape for this. This is really tiring us out. And we realized, you really can't do that to your body. You have to do exercises to keep your cardio up, to keep your quads in shape, and really constantly be working on it. So when we started realizing that to be an issue, we started walking more, and we try to squeeze walks in between our hikes more. And that really made a huge difference.
It helped.
Yeah, that's really smart. I'm in the fitness business also, and I have always found a balance between gym workouts and hiking. There really is no substitute for the actual act of hiking and walking uphill. That is the best preparation you can do. But I find a little bit of gym workout is a great, let's call it a physical reserve. And I like a little extra in the tank to go on trips. And I think you guys obviously do too. And I think, I do want to share something, because there's something that really interests me. The physiology of hiking has been on my mind a lot. And I want to share something. I know you guys have seen this because it's in the book, but I want to share it with the viewers. It's a really interesting physiological change that occurs at a very basic level to people who work their legs. And hiking is obviously leg centric, and way more than marathon running or jogging, because you're usually carrying a pack, which makes it weight bearing, which puts extra exercise, extra effort, not only into building your cardiovascular system, but if you take a look at these cross sections of an upper thigh, look at the 40-year-old triathlete thigh, a pretty thick bone, substantial muscle and very little body fat. Compare that to a sedentary 74-year-old where it's a lot of body fat, a thinner bone, and not much muscle. But then you compare it to a 74-year-old athlete, in this case, a triathlete, and you can see, this is why I like to think of hiking as the fountain of youth. You can, if you keep those leg muscles limber and strong, that is one of the main components to longevity. And that not only helps you, it helps your entire body, but it does some miraculous things. Like it enables you as you get older to be more able to resist falling. And if you should fall, you don't break, you bounce. And so I can't recommend, what you're doing is a phenomenal thing. But then even more profound is this concept of angiogenesis, which a lot of people don't understand. But basically that means the more you work those muscles, your body reacts not only by growing larger muscles, but before that, it grows new capillaries. So you create denser veins running through your body, which means the nutrients that get to your body are stronger. It means your blood pressure. It means everything about your cardiovascular system works better, which keeps you younger. It keeps those muscles younger. And that's a critical thing. So this is one of the reasons I'm so high on hiking. And because it does some things at a very fundamental physiological level that other exercises don't do. So good on you guys for doing it the way you've been doing it. It really works, and it'll show its benefits in the out years. So let's get back to your journeys. Most people know Mount Washington is the tallest mountain in the Northeast, 6,288 feet. You guys have climbed it. And what I thought was really interesting, though, is your story about, Andrea, I'll tip it ahead and you can tell the story, but you climbed it with a broken wrist, which I think shows just an incredible amount of motivation. And I'll let you take it from there. Let's hear the story.
So a couple of weeks prior to our climb to Washington, we did the Carters, and we did all three. And again, lessons learned about taking care of yourself. And we were hurrying down, and we were tired, and we covered a lot of territory. And I tripped over a root in the ground. Wasn't really going that fast. It wasn't very steep. I just didn't keep my eyes on every step I take, which you do need to do. And down I went. And I, of course, yelled an expletive very loudly. And shortly after that, a trail angel appeared, and there were three women. They were wilderness rescue folk who had, were certified and everything. And they got together a splint for me and took care of me. And I walked out, and I was hurting, but they were there to help me and sort of to give me the confidence to, you can do this, you can walk out. Went to the doctor the next day, and my husband, of course, said I was whining, and it was just probably a little sprain, no biggie. And so the ER doc said, well, the good news is she wasn't whining, it's broken. The bad news is it's broken. And he casted it the next day, the orthopod did. And my first question was, well, I have a hike planned in 2 weeks from Mount Washington. Can I hike in the cast? And he said, you're probably safer in the cast. It's gonna, protect you. So I said, okay. So Kathy and I hiked Washington, and on the way up, we did
October.
It was October, a week before it snowed. So we made it before the snow, so we were good. But we hiked up the Alamoosic Ravine Trail to Monroe, and then crossed over to Washington. And again, people appeared when I needed them, because I only had one wrist. And my son got married shortly after that, and I hid my wrist with a shawl, so you would never know that it was broken, because I wanted to look good. But on the hike, I didn't care. I just hiked with a broken wrist, and I summited Washington and felt pretty good about it.
That's a major accomplishment, even when you're healthy. I mean, it's 4,000 vertical feet up and down. And the Ammo Trail is not easy. It's slabs and slippery, and So yeah,
Water crossing.
a lot of water crossings. Oh,
Waterfall water crossing, which was kind
Oh.
of scary.
yeah, I can't show it here, but I actually came down the ML Trail once in the pouring rain, and it was like walking in a waterfall. It was amazing. You know, I can also empathize with you. The one of two injuries I've had in my 50 years of hiking and climbing was literally, I was standing on the summit of Mount Washington, where those towers are, for those of you who don't know the mountain, and it was raining, and I slipped and I landed on my elbow and I dislocated my elbow on the summit of Mount Washington.
Wow.
Which it's been, you know, I've been up it about 50 times, but it was just what you said, Andrea, is so true. You let your guard down. You weren't looking for the ground and you slipped. And that's the same thing I did. I thought, hey, I just got up here. I'm safe as could be. I can't possibly fall. And of course, I let my guard down, and there you go.
Yep.
Went on your elbow. So, but great. I mean, have you guys done it more than once, or was that your sole attempt at Washington?
I had done it in my 20s and had quite the experience on the Jewel Trail. We actually, I don't even know, I think it must have been the Ammonoosuc Trail that we went up, because
Yeah.
we were in a complete fog and you barely could see your own feet. And then all of a sudden it was like a big curtain lifted,
Yeah.
and right in front of us within arm's length was the Lake of the Clouds hut, which was, oh my gosh. So we ate lunch in the Lake of the Clouds hut and said, you know, we're pretty close to the top. We should just do it. So we got up and I said, you know, there is the Cog Railway. Maybe we could like hitch a ride on the Cog Railway going down. And we didn't end up having enough money, and they didn't really want people to go one way. And then it started to rain and there was no choice. So there was down the Jewel Trail, and it was a slow go because those rocks get slippery when it's wet. And it was not a great experience that first time up. But this second time, even with Andrea's broken wrist, it really wasn't bad. It was
No.
one of our easier hikes, actually.
Yep.
Yep.
It may be the tallest, but there's ways to get up at it's more of an endurance test than a risky thing. And it meets your criteria, Andrea, for you're not on a cliff's edge on those trails, you know.
The Jewel
Right.
Trail down, the Jewel
Yeah.
Trail down is the way to go.
Yeah, no, those are great trails. So yeah, fantastic
A lot
journey.
of rock hopping, which prepared us for a lot of more rock hopping that we were
Well, you know, we're
do.
going to get to rock hopping, I think, like soon, but we'll get to that in a second. And I do want to celebrate now your accomplishment of finishing the 67 on Mount Katahdin, which, for those of you who don't know, it's the tallest mountain in Maine. It's the endpoint of the famed Appalachian Trail, and in the case of Andrea and Kathy, it's their 67th of 67. So lots of reasons to celebrate. And it's only a couple weeks ago. So maybe you could give us a little story of the journey there. I mean, it's a serious climb. And I know it was difficult. So let's hear how that came to be.
So we kind of purposely saved it for last because it was pretty ominous thinking about it. It's a very elusive mountain, very protected by Baxter State Park. Having, you know, it was adding another component that we hadn't added to our hikes, which was the camping piece. And we had to make reservations way in advance to get a spot at Roaring Brook Campground. And we planned for 2 nights in the lean-to, so that we had the night before the hike and potentially the night after the hike, because we already, you know, had done the research. We knew it was going to be big, and we were planning, you know, 12 hours. So yeah. So, you know, it was a big lesson, I think, in flexibility, because you really, you know, if you really want to do something like this, because it's so hard to get all the ducks lined up with the reservations, with with everything around this hike was big. And so we really, were pretty open-ended about the other end of the week. We had planned to meet up on a Tuesday. Our perfect plan was that the hike was going to happen on Wednesday. We were going to stay over and then get out of there on Thursday. Well, the perfect plan doesn't always happen. And it did not. The rains came big time. Oh boy, we had puddles outside the lean-to. We woke up, Andrea was our alarm clock, and we woke up at 4:30 in the morning to be prepared to start hiking early, and the rain was coming down. Well, the ranger doesn't post the weather report for the day until 7.
Right.
And, we had heard things can change quickly up there, and they can, but we had looked ahead at weather and we were pretty sure we knew what the verdict was going to be. And we had already talked about it. We said, if the perfect plan doesn't work, we have Thursday. We could still hike on Thursday. And beyond that, we'll have to wing it. We'll have to figure something out. So we checked in with the ranger at 7, and it was like a 99% chance of rain for the day. And we knew the trails were going to be hard for us. And we just said, you know what? We came all this way. Why do this in miserable conditions? Could be dangerous for us. Let's wait and go on Thursday where there was some sun predicted. We knew it was going to be much better. So we had to figure out then, well, what were we going to do with a day that we were up at 4:30 in the morning and it was pouring rain? And to get into Baxter State Park, it's a whole hour from the last spot of cell service and any sort of civilization. And you're driving on a dirt road for an hour to get to your campsite. It's not, right next to town. You're out there in the middle of nowhere. And, there's nothing happening except what the beauty of nature around you. So we talked about, what could we do to pass the time? And we decided we'd take a field trip, an hour drive into town and find a place where we could get some nice hot tea or something to warm up. It was freezing cold, and had a little lunch. And then we went to the dollar store and bought a deck of cards and went to the Millinocket Public Library and played cards all afternoon. And that's how we passed our day. And we went back with a plan in place to get up early the next morning. But in addition to getting ready for our hike, we also had to pack up the camp. So we had to do all that. We got on the trail at 6, signed in on the ranger's log sheet, and we went up the Chimney Pond Trail to North Basin Cutoff and onto Hamlin Ridge, because we had 2 peaks we had to accomplish to achieve this goal. We had the Hamlin Peak, and then we had to get over to the Baxter Peak. And those 2 peaks are not really close to each other. And everything was great on our hike until we started to see the first peaks of Katahdin as we were coming out of tree line. Everything was beautiful. We were so inspired by the beauty of that mountain. And then the conditions changed and they were hard. And it was kind of that scenario that Andrea doesn't like so much, where there was a lot of openness on either side of us and some big monster rocks that we were climbing up this big ridge. And the views were amazing, but we honestly couldn't even see them because we were so concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other and one hand over hand. And we got to some spots that were really tricky, and we were having some moments. And just as we were having those moments, along came our group of trail angels that always seem to come along most when we need them. And Andrea was having a big moment and really appreciated the help of uh, this group of hikers that came along, a teenager who had just finished summer camp and had the day before had finished doing the 100-mile wilderness with his camp. And he was the first one of the group to jump in and say, hey, I'll take your poles. Give me your
Yeah.
backpack. I'll take your backpack and you just concentrate on getting up. And then he lent a hand and, you know, he helped in an enormous way, right? In a spot where sometimes you just get stuck in a spot and you think, oh my gosh, how I can't move, I can't do anything. And we managed every time, every hike we did, there was always a moment of some type. And there was always somebody that came along, and, you know, it's about accepting the help too. So Andrea, you might want to jump in on that one.
Well, accepting help is hard. And, I think we're all sort of conditioned to, well, you can do this yourself. And, you're out here and you should know what you're doing. And I think that's really not the way it is. I mean, I think we're all out there, we're all hikers. And I've been able to pay it forward to other people as I, got a little bit more experience. But there were, as Kathy said, there were moments on that hike, and believe me, there were moments in other hikes when I had to say, could I hand you my poles, or could I throw you my pack, or would you lend me a hand? I mean, for folks who are hikers, there's a spot on the Blueberry Ledges where it's that moment, and just you need a little help, or there's the chimney on East Osceola. I mean, there are those moments of abject fear but there's somebody who helps you. And to me, that's the beauty of the spirit of togetherness on the trail. And it was really, it's been really affirming and refreshing to me about that. So it was a fantastic hike. If you look at that picture at the summit, you see these sort of ominous clouds behind us. So the sun was out as we got to the top, and we snapped the picture, and immediately following that, there was lightning, thunder, and freezing rain. So my husband's always said to me, things above the tree line can change in an instant, and he's right. And so we ran down Katahdin because we wanted to get out of the being above the tree line.
And when she says that that cloud opened up and the sleet came down, it dumped. I mean,
Yeah.
we had our rain gear, but it didn't matter. It was going down our boots. I mean, there were ice pellets going down our boots. We had to change our socks before we could go down the saddle trail to finish the hike.
Well, I have to bring up this point right now because it's a good lesson. You had learned how to deal with this layer by layer over the years, all those hikes. If you were a brand new hiker in that situation, panic likely would have ensued. But, as scary as it was, as difficult as it was, you did the right things. And listen, a lot of people don't even think of extra socks, right? So you're prepared for that. A lot of people would say, oh, sunny day, I don't need my rain gear, I'll save some weight. But when you've accumulated that kind of experience that you have, you learn that you have to be prepared for anything. You learn that lesson.
You absolutely do. And we learned way back when we did the Owl's Head hike that we learned the hard way. We did have some extra socks, but there was more than one incident of a problem on the water crossings, let's say. And so as careful as we were, as prepared as we knew to be, we ran out of dry socks, and I ended up hiking 7 miles in wet socks, and I could barely walk for 2 weeks after that hike because the blisters were so bad. In fact, that was our hike number 39 of the 48, 22 miles and almost 14 and a half hours. And it was brutal. And it was the first hike on our whole journey that made me question why were we doing this?
Well, you know,
And
Kathy, what you,
I just have to give a shout out to say that Laura McEdward, I know you're out there, and if it wasn't for you sitting and having breakfast with me in with my very sore feet at Noni's in Peterborough after that hike and giving me the pep talk about how close I was to the finish line and how I couldn't give up now. If it wasn't for that, I might not be here tonight.
incredible. Kathy, thank you also, because as we know, you learn from other people's stories. And you're about the 20th person to reinforce why I'm not all that interested in doing Owl's Head. So for some reason, it's never appealed to me. I don't know. There's no view from the top. On top of that, you should tell people that it's difficult to get to, but then when you get to the top, you're still in the woods and you can't see anything. So
that was one that had a false summit too.
yes,
Yeah.
and we'll get to Falls Summit, but it speaks to the motivation, because it's not just about the views. You had an objective to click that nut off the list. You had to do it and you knew going in it was going to be a miserable slog. You knew that everybody knows about those water crossings. Yeah.
And one of the things that we did when we knew we were going to have a hard hike is that we would pre-plan a treat for ourselves after the fact. We had to earn it, obviously, but when we were making all these trips up to the White Mountains, it was a 3-hour jaunt in each direction for us. And we knew that hike in particular was going to be a very long one, and we needed to get a really early start. So we had stayed the night before in a motel up in the area in Lincoln, and made the beginning of that journey easier. But on the way home, we decided that a real treat for us, and we did this on a number of our New Hampshire hikes, was that we have a favorite Mexican restaurant in Concord, New Hampshire, which is 2/3 of the way home for us, Hermanos in Concord, and great Mexican food. The staff got to know us so well, and they were really cheerleaders for us, and we'd stop and we were dirty and smelly. And they knew, and they would always, give us a table where we wouldn't offend anybody. and they would cheer us on. They'd be like, woohoo, what'd you do today? And it was great. And we got to have that nice meal and that wonderful margarita, and it was all good. That with the Advil.
See, that's one of the great things about it is also understanding that at the end of this, you get to reward yourself. I do the same thing often. And so I think it's important. You were describing some of the scenes. I want the audience to get an idea of the kind of trails that they're dealing with. On the left, that's Katahdin. In the center, and they talk about rock hopping. I believe this is your descent, right? In the center?
Saddle. Mm-hmm.
That's the saddle. And then what's on the extreme right?
I can't.
It's coming down the saddle.
Right, coming down the saddle. Right. So
it's coming down the saddle from
so
the summit.
the point I want to make here, and I clicked ahead to the slide. I'm sorry, but we talk about the physical effort of hiking, and we just looked at what it does for your muscles and your cardiovascular system. But I want to talk about something that most people don't realize. And maybe you didn't realize it when you started this, but I know you know it now, because your brains have been getting incredible workouts. And right as you age, we're all concerned with maintaining our physical health, but our cognitive health is even more important, actually, because you don't want to lose control of your brain, right? Your brain has to last as long as your body. And the interesting thing, which really convinced me to write the book, was what hiking does for your brain. And let's compare it briefly to walking on a treadmill, or walking around your house, or walking through the neighborhood with hiking. When you are hiking, when you're on a treadmill, just think about it for a second. 90% of the time, 99% of the walking you do is on flat ground that's very predictable. Your brain goes on automatic pilot. Every step, you don't really think about every step, you just walk. And you know what? I'm not knocking it. It's great cardiovascular exercise. You want to be up and walking no matter where it is, whether it's flat or not. But the interesting thing about hiking is that because it's on uneven terrain. And to your point about falling down, I guess it was on the Wildcats, Andrea, your brain has to make a calculation with every single step in order for you to not lose your balance. That's called dual tasking. Believe it or not, your eyes, all your muscles, and your body are moving through space and using an incredible amount of brain power to keep yourself going. That dual tasking exercise actually does something that is perfectly analogous to what we talked about with angiogenesis. It does neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the process of building brain cells. And if you didn't know this, I want you all to understand that when your brain and body are working together like that, you're actually building new brain cells and you're organizing them into new neural networks. New neural networks are the key. Those denser neural pathways give you cognitive reserve, which is the analogy to physical reserve. Your brain gets extra brain power, extra pathways. Those neural networks enable you to control your body better, but they are thought to be a way to prevent cognitive decline. And should you be predisposed to dementia or Alzheimer's, you can actually take action through physical exercise like hiking to offset the decline of Alzheimer's. It's a phenomenal thing. And so, you guys may feel physically fit, but I'll bet cognitive fitness is the thing that's really showing up more. And not only does it clear the fog, but you're actually creating a more resilient brain through hiking. That's, to me, that was the icing on the cake. When I started learning about that, that's what really compelled me to write the book, because it's not just a fitness book. It's about all of that. And, we talked about comfort zone. You guys, you've used the term, but the comfort zone is when you're nice and comfortable. It's safe. It's not risky. But when you start stretching, like you guys did, each step, each hike from Willard to Pierce was an expansion of your comfort zone. And along with that, you've mentioned the fear and discomfort that comes with that. Your comfort zone expands to the point where when you guys found yourself on the top of Katahdin in bad weather, your comfort zone was way bigger than it was when you started. You may not have been comfortable per se, but you had the confidence that you would somehow get through it, and you knew your bodies and your equipment were capable of overcoming that. And like, you had mentioned both of these places before. This is how your comfort zone expanded. On the left, we have those famous blueberry ledges. And we can talk a little bit more about those, Andrew. You said those were your nemesis. And then on the right, I know this spot pretty well. Kathy is in the Osceola chimney, which is a spot near the top of Mount Osceola, which is like a vertical staircase. It's almost like a ladder. And it's funny, you can circumvent that. I know you know that, but that's the direct way. You can go around that, but you chose to go directly up it. Bravo. So talk a little bit about getting out of your comfort zone. And you guys, if this had been your first hike, you would have probably turned around, I'm guessing, but you guys had built up the confidence that you could do this.
And, interestingly, after we did get through this, and it was not easy, that was a moment, a big moment. And it was one that we compared every other moment to the whole rest of our journey, because we knew that we had gotten through what seemed terrible. And we would always compare it and say, this is bad, but it's not the chimney. And we never, ever have to do the chimney again. And those were the ways that we would cope and get through it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that happens. I mean, anyone who's gone through this progression from neophyte to expert, you add these skills layer by layer to the point where, you may not want to do them again, but think of the confidence you've gained by doing that. Now you can say you did it. And for those of you who don't know, both of these places, if you get on any of the New England hiking groups, the legend about them just keeps going and going and going. People always will ask a question, what's it like at the top of Osceola? And everyone will say, well, it's a great hike, except for the chimney. You got to be careful. They build the mythology of these locations. And I don't know, for me, when I did most of these, there was no Facebook hiking group. I didn't even know they were difficult. No one even told me they were terrifying. There's now a list of the terrifying places. So you just did them. I think the Facebook groups have now labeled these places as difficult. It builds the mythology in your head because you think about it in advance, which is a harder mental task to get over. When you know they're difficult, it's a mental challenge to get yourself through these things. So you guys did great. It's quite the accomplishment.
I don't think that's always true though, because I find that I am challenged even more than a lot of people because I'm under 5 feet tall. And sometimes the long-legged variety get up these things without a lot of issues, but my short legs, it's not always so easy. So
Interesting.
I
Interesting.
had the double challenge of that.
Interesting.
And I
Yeah.
found that a lot on Katahdin, that it wasn't such a user-friendly mountain for short-legged creatures.
Oh, goodness. Well, you get double points then, Kathy. Good for you. So let's see, you brought this subject up. I want to talk about false summits, which is another way of stretching your comfort zone and getting more confidence. For those of you who have never experienced this, because we're little and mountains are big, oftentimes you find yourself going up an incline thinking you're looking at the top, and you're getting closer and closer, and then you get to the top and you realize you're not at the top. It was a false summit. And it's psychologically very challenging because you think you're finished, or you think you're at the high point and you realize no. And this happens in a lot of big mountains. Where did you say you had found the false summit recently? Was it on Katahdin?
Hamlin Ridge had a couple of false summits.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of funny. So Kathy and I have certainly experienced this, and then we've had it happen to us. So you're going up, you think you're at the top, you're at a false summit, and you're like, oh no, this isn't it. So people are coming down, right? And so you say, oh, how much further? Or are we almost there yet? And it's amazing. Some people say, oh, you got this, you're almost there. Other people say, well, you got a ways ahead of you. And they actually have t-shirts now that, are we there yet? And almost there. I mean, it's sort of become a thing. And, when you're at that point and you hit a couple of false summits and you just want to be done, that, as you pointed out, psychologically, that's a tough one to get over. But you are almost there, even though almost there generally means a half a mile.
Yeah, no, it's kind of weird. But here's the thing that this is about. And I know you guys probably recognize this spot. This is right up at the top of Mount Monadnock. And what I love about climbing and hiking is you do false summits, the effort, the views, you do gradually learn that by breaking challenges down into smaller pieces, because we're small compared to these mountains, you can overcome a lot. And I find that spills over into your everyday life. It makes you more confident in everything you do. And I can tell that you guys have experienced that as well. But, this would be the interesting time to talk about the concept of humility, Andrea. We had talked about that. And I'm also humbled by the mountains. What I like myself about being up in the high places, it reminds you that there are things much bigger than you. It's a very humbling thing, and it's a very spiritual thing for some of us. We talk about that.
As I said earlier, asking for help has always been a struggle for me. And I think it is for a lot of people. You just sort of muddle through, you do it on your own, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But being humble and realizing that, there are lots of challenges in life, and you need to work really hard to get them. I've used it for myself. I'm a teacher. I use it with my students. I try to have it as a tool to show them, you too are going to come up with challenges, but you can do this. And that partialization that you were talking about, breaking it down, biting off measurable chunks, starting with Willard, ending on Katahdin. There's a method to that whole madness of, okay, I've gained a little bit more confidence. I can do this. So with each successive hike, lessons learned, You learn to be humble, but you also gain your confidence. And I think that's important.
Yep, very much so. Very much so.
It helped us a lot to journal our hikes too, because they do start to blend together, and we wrote down things that we learned each time. Whoever wasn't driving was writing. And it was great to be able to look back and say, we had similar conditions when we did this hike, and this is what we need to be better prepared. So it really, I can't stress that enough, how helpful that was.
Yeah, I think that's, I find that's a big part of hiking and mountaineering is chronicling your journeys. And there's so many wonderful stories of hiking and climbing as a result of that, because you do have a lot of downtime, I guess, and you've experienced something that is rather unusual. And I think that there's an aspect of hiking and climbing that I like to refer to. I actually came up with a name for it called JOBO, the joy of being outside. And I think that's that's a worthy goal, is to experience that. And Andrew, this picture that you guys sent me when you're on Saddleback, it's clear that you're extremely happy, and it's a kind of a happiness you can't really explain. It's not like getting a birthday present. It's something much deeper, it's not like Christmas. It's a real inner kind of happiness, and it just kind of oozes out, doesn't it?
It's a wonderful feeling. And another feeling, and I was trying to explain it to a friend the other day, and I don't think I did a really good job, but there's another feeling that is that sort of unmitigated joy, but also at the end of a hike, when we sit down in the car, and there's this feeling of calmness that comes over. You're exhausted, let's face it, you're really tired, but it's this feeling of calmness and just at peace with yourself that I've never experienced in any other type of exercise or anything, that is just so wonderful. So the combination of this picture where I really I felt on top of the world, but also this quietness, quieting my mind, this inner peace after a long hike, has really been very therapeutic for me in life.
And Andrew, that is really the perfect segue. I know you didn't know this was coming, but I put a slide in here. I'm sorry, that's the next slide, but I do want to talk about this first. The concept of JOBO, joy of being outside. As I was talking to all these interviewees during the book, and I asked everybody for pictures, almost everybody sent a picture with their hands over their heads. And that's part of that. It's such a joyous thing. And when you get down from that hike, when that experience is over, and this is the part that really a lot of people, I think, can benefit from. You talked about the calm. You talked about there's a serenity that comes with that. Well, there are a lot of places that are teaching mindfulness classes for $100 an hour, where they will teach you to breathe in a rhythm and focus your mind on your body and the present to experience that kind of calm. And it's mindfulness. It's a big industry now. Again, many resorts are charging big bucks for an hour of mindfulness training. Well, I think 12 hours on the trail is exponentially more beneficial. It is meditation in motion, because you're doing all the things that mindfulness says it does, which is you breathe rhythmically, deeply, because you're exerting yourself, but also you can't not be present. You're focused on your whereabouts. You're listening to the sounds of the outdoors. You have to make sure you don't fall. That kind of focus is what creates the therapeutic effect. So when you're done, you are very calm. And I think that's what you're describing. It's the best mindfulness there is a hike.
We say that all the time.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly useful. I want to wrap up with one more slide, which really I found to be just an incredible quote that you sent me, Kathy, that you guys like. And then we'll go to Q&A. So if you guys want to start thinking about your questions, you can start dropping them into the Q&A or the chat. But I just love this quote. And that's why I always say, you just got to go out and do it. And listen, if you listen to the story we just heard, Mount Willard, if you're in New England, is like the perfect place to start understanding where this is about. It'll take you an hour and a half from the bottom to get $1 million view. That $1 million view is the kind of thing that can gift you, that can become addictive. And it sounds to me like you guys did get addicted to the sensory and the physical, the cognitive, the mindfulness, the whole gestalt of being up in high places. And it's a remarkable thing, a remarkable thing. So with that, everyone, I'd love to hear some questions. We will stay as long as needed to answer questions. And let me start it off, though. I know some of you are going to ask this question because I always get it. I'd like to know, it's the pressing question. Do you guys use polls or not?
Yes.
Talk about why, because I always love, I love to defend using polls.
I have a love-hate relationship with polls. Polls are fabulous on the way down. Sometimes on the way up, they can be a hindrance. So I'm constantly throwing my polls up, and then, 4 points, always 4 points is better on, when you're climbing hand over hand with bouldering. So, you can collapse your poles. My poles are collapsible. I can put them on my pack, but sometimes that's more of a pain in the neck than it's worth. But on the way down, they are invaluable. And I recently did a hike right here in down East Maine where I didn't use poles on the Gold Coast. And I couldn't believe the difference in my confidence level without those poles. And it was a fairly easy hike. My whole center of balance was off. So poles, they're a lifesaver.
They help my knees a lot on the way down. It really takes the pressure off my knees. And as you probably saw in the photo of us on our number 48, I had a knee brace on one knee because I was really having an issue for a while, and the poles were crucial for getting through that.
Yeah, I'll share something with you. Obviously, poles give you 4 points of contact with the ground instead of 2. For those of us who are getting on in years, that extra confidence that you're not going to slip and fall is a good thing. But I'll tell you something most people don't think about. I learned this in high altitude mountaineering. When you are going uphill with poles, your hands are up. You're constantly doing this. That opens up your chest. It allows you to get more oxygen. And for me, I always use poles now because I know I'm breathing better because my arms aren't hanging at my side, collapsing my chest. So poles, not only balance and security, you breathe better with poles. It's an amazing thing. And it does take people estimate between 10 and 20% of the strain off of your knees coming downhill. So it's a lot easier on aging knees, no question about it. So good on that. Okay, so another question. Did you see any wildlife on your hikes?
We saw a lot of signs of moose, and we were sure when we were doing the very remote hikes that were part of the main group of mountains, we were pretty sure that we were going to see a moose. We weren't quite sure what we were going to do if we saw one, but we know because we got to have some quality time, shall I say, Andrea, with the Carabasset Valley police. And they told us what to do. And I said, he said, you need to make yourself bigger if you see a moose. And I said, I would love to know how to do that, even if I don't see a moose. And he said, just put your poles up and go rah, 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 rah. And they don't like that. They get very anxious and they disappear. I would never have known that. So I'm kind of glad that we didn't encounter one.
There you go.
But we did see a lot of signs. And
I think the
We saw less wildlife than we thought. I thought we'd seen abundance of wildlife, and honestly, we really didn't. I think most wildlife is shy, and we're making a lot of noise. We're tromping through the woods, so we didn't see any bears, we didn't see any moose.
Yeah, I mean, everybody asks about bears in New England, obviously, and I'll tell you, I know you guys didn't see one. I've been hiking 50 years in the Northeast. I've seen a bear once from a distance, and of course, it was on Bear Mountain in Connecticut. So that's the only time I've ever seen a bear. So generally, no, there's nothing to be really fearful from in the Northeast from wildlife. I always tell people that the hiking groups always dwell on it, but I don't think there's any reason to be fearful. Another question. Would either of you have done this or felt safe hiking alone?
I do sometimes hike alone. I especially enjoy it in the winter now, up the ridge trail on Mount Monadnock, up the Pompelli Ridge.
Yep.
But I would not ever recommend doing something like an Owl's Head alone. Just too much mileage and too many things that could go wrong.
Well, certainly no
There's
self-service.
definitely, a balance of being brave and being dumb. I think you just have to balance it out and figure out what makes sense.
So-
where are you safe?
Do you carry a spot device or an inReach device? A GPS locator that you can call for help? Have any of you used that in the past? Interesting. Very interesting. Next question. What's next for you guys? Of course.
So I got to jump in on this one. So after the hike was over, after Katahdin, and by the way, Kathy said the first part, we walked up the trail at 6 a.m. We walked out at 9 p.m. That hike took us 15 hours, and we walked out in headlamps. And so after the hike, we said, okay, that's it. We're done. We're never doing it again. This is it. We've done the 67. This is just too much for us. Well, a week went by, and then it started. And I was walking with my neighbor, Marcia, who joined us on Katahdin. And I said, I don't know, maybe just the Saddle Trail, maybe next summer. What do you think? And we high-fived each other. And right after the hike, I texted Kathy and I said, come on, Kathy, let's make this an annual trip and do Katahdin. So a week later, we're already back. We're trying to figure out what our next hike is.
I think, during this whole process, and we didn't get to really tell you this, but during the span of COVID, Andrea sold her house, the renovated barn, and moved to northern coastal Maine. And it's about a 7-hour time difference for us now. I mean, she's 7 hours away. So we both have, more local hiking buddies that we hike with, and we always will feel this really strong connection, but the hikes together, will be harder.
Increasingly harder, yeah. Well,
But the good news is you have a camp in Maine, so you'll go halfway, and then we'll hike Katahdin together. Because
yeah, I have a feeling Maine is going to be on your calendar more than New Hampshire in the future. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Questions? Well, fantastic. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the story and appreciate the accomplishment. I know I got so much out of this. I'm feeling pretty psyched to do Owlhead right now. Maybe I'll knock that one off the list. I'm behind you guys. I've got 35 of the 48, but I wasn't even counting until recently. So maybe I'll do it. Getting some thank yous from everybody, and really appreciate everyone joining. And we'll keep people posted on your progress. I look forward to following you guys on social media, and maybe doing another one when you do there must be 100 list somewhere, right? that you can accomplish. So
Well, Martin, you come with us on a lot of hikes. You don't realize it, but you're a big inspiration. And when we're hiking, we'll also say, well, Martin said this. So you've been a big booster to us. So thank you for that. as
I
well.
appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's just, seriously, one of the best things about this book for me is getting people from all over the world to write in and say, thank you. I learned something, or you inspired me, or you got me to hike. I was sitting on the couch and now I'm a hiker, which really was what we did that for. So again,
Thank
so
you.
thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful night. For those of you who want access to this, we're going to have a recording that you'll be able to watch it again and again. For those who didn't make it, you'll be able to watch the recording. And I hope if you have any questions, you know how to reach us.